As long as you stay away from a tornado, you're safe.
Nice. Looking to finish, and it's all over.
That was unbelievable.
I really care about accomplishments as much as I care about being remembered for things like work ethic.
Rich Franklin wasn't just a technical fighter who was a very good athlete. He had a certain level of toughness.
I broke my hand before and I didn't quit. It's a broken arm!
In a sport built on violence, where scars are badges of honor and chaos is a path to fame, there was one man who walked into the cage, not from the streets, but from a classroom. No criminal past, no broken home, just chalk dust, textbooks, and a fire in his heart. Rich Franklin wasn't raised to be a fighter, he chose it. Not because he had to, but because something inside him demanded more than ordinary life. A math teacher by day, a warrior by night, he stepped into a world that chews men up and spits them out. And somehow, he thrived. This is not your typical fight story. This is the quiet storm, the thinking man's champion. This is Rich Franklin. You're watching Iron Arena, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because we bring you the untold stories behind the fists, the pain, and the legacy. Rise of Rich Franklin. Rich Franklin's rise didn't follow the pattern of most fighters who climbed out of chaos or poverty. His journey wasn't forged in back alleys or underground fight clubs, but in university halls and classrooms where the only battles were intellectual. Before he ever stepped into a cage, Franklin was a scholar earning a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's in education, a man who wore ties, gave homework, and calmly explained equations to students who never imagined their teacher would one day become a world champion in one of the most brutal sports on earth. But something deep within him refused to settle for normalcy, a hunger that grew stronger with each passing year. It was never about fame or violence. It was about testing limits, pushing boundaries, and proving that greatness doesn't have to come from brokenness. As his training intensified and his amateur fights turned professional, Franklin's path became clear. He wasn't leaving the classroom to escape something, he was chasing something bigger than himself. And once he stepped into the Octagon, the world would have no choice but to notice. Learning the basics. Rich Franklin didn't come from a long line of fighters. He didn't have a black belt from childhood or a legendary coach guiding him from the sidelines. What he had was curiosity, work ethic, and a relentless desire to improve. In the early days, his training wasn't glamorous. No million-dollar gyms, no state-of-the-art equipment. Just borrowed time in local facilities, long nights studying tapes, and a body constantly pushed past its limits. He blended styles through trial and error, learning what worked and what didn't, dissecting his own performance with the mind of an educator and the heart of a competitor. His background in mathematics gave him a unique advantage. He approached fighting like a problem to be solved, breaking down patterns, angles, and timing with clinical precision. Every opponent became a formula, every round an equation. And little by little, Franklin built himself not just into a fighter, but into a complete martial artist. In a world where power and rage often dominate, he brought something different to the cage: thought, strategy, and deliberate control. That foundation built through sweat, solitude, and sharp thinking became the cornerstone of everything that came next. UFC journey begins. When Rich Franklin entered the UFC, he didn't carry hype or headlines, he carried results. He wasn't loud. He didn't trash talk. He just walked in, handled business, and left with the win. Fight after fight, he built his reputation on clean technique, smart pacing, and unshakable composure. In 2005, everything changed when he faced Evan Tanner for the UFC middleweight championship. It wasn't just a title bout, It was his statement to the world. That night, Franklin dismantled Tanner with surgical precision, earning a TKO and securing the belt. But even as champion, he never lost the humility of a teacher. He didn't gloat, he led. During his reign, he took on all challengers, David Luiso, Nate Quarry, and more each fight, reinforcing his position not just as a skilled athlete, but as a thinking man's warrior. Then came the storm, Anderson Silva, a fighter unlike any other. In their fateful clash, Franklin was outclassed, his strengths neutralized, his rhythm shattered. It was a loss that echoed loudly. But what made Franklin different wasn't how he won, it was how he responded to defeat. He didn't crumble. He didn't make excuses. He evolved. His journey became less about the title and more about the process. It wasn't about holding on to gold. It was about learning from every moment in that cage. And Franklin's evolution as a fighter and as a man had only just begun. Moving to light heavyweight, with the middleweight landscape shifting and his own body demanding a new approach, Franklin made the calculated decision to move up to light heavyweight, a weight class filled with legends, giants, and knockout artists. This wasn't just a physical leap, it was mental warfare. The men were bigger, the power was greater, and the margin for error was razor thin. But Franklin, never one to back away from a challenge, adapted. He adjusted his training, embraced new strategies, and stayed true to the intelligence that had always set him apart. His battles in this division became iconic, not just because of who he fought, but how he fought them. The first war with Wanderlei Silva was a masterpiece of resilience. His showdown with Chuck Liddell was dramatic and dangerous and ended with Franklin landing a perfect knockout despite having his arm broken earlier in the round. These were not just fights. They were moments of legacy battles that proved even in a division stacked with power and legends, Rich Franklin had earned his place among them. He wasn't just there to compete. He was there to leave his mark. And that mark would last long after he left the Octagon. Retirement from MMA. In a sport where legends often stay too long, where the roar of the crowd becomes addictive and the body pays the price, Rich Franklin did the unthinkable. He left on his own terms. He had nothing left to prove, no grudges to settle, no desperate chase for one last moment in the spotlight. After years of grueling battles, multiple injuries, and more than a few scars, Franklin recognized the rare wisdom that eludes many fighters, knowing when to stop. His final fights were still competitive, still dangerous, but there was a calmness in his approach, the look of a man at peace with the ending. He stepped away with his health, his mind, and his dignity intact. And more importantly, he walked into the next chapter of his life not as a fallen warrior, but as a champion who had closed the book with purpose and pride. Franklin didn't disappear after retirement. Instead, he pivoted to new roles, using his experience, leadership, and intellect to contribute to the sport in ways beyond just the cage.
Rich Franklin, I heard he retired today. When mixed martial arts was misunderstood, Rich Franklin was a great example of what a mixed martial artist really was.
New UFC middleweight champion Rich Franklin!
I think the thing about Rich that made Rich stand out was he was a school teacher. At the time, people had this idea of what they thought a UFC fighter would look like, would act like.
Life after MMA. For Rich Franklin, retirement wasn't a fade into silence. It was a pivot into purpose. He traded gloves for suits, stepping into a leadership role as vice president of O&E Championship. There, he helped shape a global MMA brand rooted in respect, honor, and discipline values he had carried throughout his entire career. But Franklin didn't just sit behind a desk. He mentored fighters, developed talent, and brought wisdom into an industry that often chews up the inexperienced. Outside the cage, he expanded his influence further through motivational speaking, charity work, and entrepreneurial ventures. He didn't just transition out of MMA, he evolved. While many ex-fighters struggle to redefine themselves, Franklin became more than an athlete. He became a model for what life after the cage can look like: balanced, meaningful, and inspiring. For him, the fight was never just physical. It was always about building, teaching, and leaving something behind that others could learn from. His success outside the cage proved that a fighter's worth doesn't end with retirement. It evolves, expands, and touches lives in ways beyond fighting. Rich Franklin's TED Talk. When Rich Franklin took the stage for his TED Talk, he wasn't wearing gloves or a fight face. He stood there, not as a warrior, but as a thinker. He spoke not of wins and losses, but of identity, reinvention, and the quiet battle that begins when the cheering stops. With the same composure he showed in the cage, Franklin shared how stepping away from fighting meant confronting a far more personal question: who am I without the spotlight? His words weren't dramatic or flashy, they were honest. He talked about leaving behind a career that had defined him and learning to find purpose in new places. For fans, it was a glimpse into the soul of a fighter who had always carried himself with humility. And for those unfamiliar with MMA, it was a universal lesson: you are more than your job, your title, your image. Franklin's message hit harder than a punch. It lingered in the mind, a reminder that true strength often shows itself in silence. Rich Franklin proved that you don't have to be born into darkness to shine in the fight game. He wasn't just a champion inside the octagon. He was a symbol of balance, discipline, and class in a sport that often forgets all three. If his journey inspired you from the chalkboard to the cage, don't just scroll past. Like this video, subscribe to Iron Arena, and hit the bell, because every week we bring you the real stories behind the blood, sweat, and survival. This is Iron Arena, where legends are more than highlight reels. They're lessons in life.